My name is Nadia. I'm 32 years old, and I stood in the small dressing room of St. Agnes Chapel, staring at myself in a mirror that had seen 100 brides before me, feeling nothing but a hollow, aching dread where joy should have been. My dress fit perfectly. My hair was pinned exactly the way I'd practiced. My bouquet of white roses trembled slightly in my hands, because I could hear my father's voice through the thin wall, loud enough that half the guests probably heard it too. "He works in a warehouse," my father was saying to my uncle, not bothering to lower his voice. A warehouse. My daughter, marrying a nobody who drives a forklift for a living. This is second seat stories, and this is my wedding day. I closed my eyes and breathed through it, the way I'd been breathing through it for 8 months, ever since I brought Wesley home for the first time. My family never gave him a fair chance. My mother asked him in front of everyone at Thanksgiving whether he had any actual plans for his future. As if raising his 2 younger siblings alone after his parents died in a car accident when he was 19 wasn't a plan. Wasn't a life, wasn't proof of exactly the kind of man he was. My father refused to shake his hand the first time they met, and never warmed since. Wesley's calloused hands, his modest apartment, his steady, unglamorous job, it made him invisible to them. Made him nothing, but I loved him. Loved the way he remembered exactly how I took my coffee. The way he drove 4 hours through a snowstorm just to bring me soup when I was sick. The way he never once asked me to choose between him and my family, even when they made it painfully clear they'd rather he didn't exist. So when my father knocked and stepped into the dressing room without waiting for an answer, I already knew what was coming. "Your grandfather isn't here," he said flatly. "He had a golf thing. And frankly, Nadia, I'm not walking you down that aisle either. I'm not going to stand in front of 200 people and pretend I'm proud of this." I stared at him, waiting for the joke. His face stayed cold and certain. "Dad, please," I whispered. "It's my wedding day. Walk yourself. That's what happens when you marry a nobody." He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Then he turned and walked back out to the chapel. Through the cracked door, I watched him settle into the very back pew beside my mother, arms crossed, chin lifted, positioning himself like a spectator at a show he intended to enjoy. The coordinator appeared at my elbow, asking gently if I wanted to postpone. If I wanted someone else to step in. I looked past her, toward the closed chapel doors, toward the muffled sound of 200 guests waiting, toward Wesley somewhere on the other side, already standing at the altar, probably wondering what was taking so long. Something in me hardened. "No," I said, straightening my spine. "I'll walk myself." The doors opened. The music swelled. Every head turned toward me. I gripped my bouquet and started down the aisle alone, my heels echoing against the old wooden floor, my eyes fixed on Wesley, who stood frozen at the altar, jaw tight, clearly just realizing what my father had done. I could feel the whispers rippling through the pews. Could feel eyes crawling over my empty side, searching for the father who should have been there and finding only empty space. I was halfway down, my breath shaking, my knees nearly giving out under 200 stairs, when the heavy chapel doors behind me creaked open again. I froze, thinking maybe my father had changed his mind. What I saw when I turned made my heart stop entirely. 30 strangers in matching charcoal gray suits walked in and lined both sides of the aisle, moving with quiet, deliberate precision that silenced the entire chapel. Solemn faces, shoulder to shoulder, like a wall of silent witnesses. Gasps rippled through the guests. My mother half rose from her seat. My father's smug expression cracked into confusion. One of them, tall, silver-haired, carrying himself like someone used to being obeyed, stopped directly beside the back row. He turned, looked straight at my father, and said one word. "Sir." The chapel went utterly silent. "Sir," he repeated, his voice calm but carrying real authority. "With respect, you don't get to sit there and enjoy this. Not after what you just did to your daughter." My father's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. My mother's hand flew to her chest. I stood frozen in the middle of the aisle, bouquet trembling, having no idea who these 30 people even were. The silver-haired man turned toward me and gave a small, respectful nod. Mrs. Forgive us for the dramatic entrance. My name is Marcus Okafor. I'm the Regional Director of Operations for Hallcrest Logistics. The name meant nothing to me at first, until I saw Wesley's face at the altar, pale with shock, eyes glistening as recognition dawned. Hallcrest Logistics. Wesley's company? Marcus was his boss's boss, a man Wesley had mentioned only a handful of times, always with quiet respect. 6 years ago, Marcus continued, his voice steady enough to reach every corner of the silent chapel, Wesley Reyes walked into our warehouse as a 19-year-old kid who'd just lost both his parents and was raising 2 younger siblings on his own. He took every shift he could get. He never complained. He trained new hires without being asked. He caught safety violations that saved us from lawsuits. He quietly mentored a dozen young men who had nowhere else to turn. 2 years ago, when our Denver facility was about to shut down and put 400 people out of work, Wesley was the one who redesigned our entire intake process and saved that location. He is, without exaggeration, one of the most extraordinary employees I've had in 30 years of business. Tears slid down my cheeks, not from sadness now, but from something fuller. Something like pride cracking open in my chest. Marcus gestured to the 30 people lining the aisle. Every person standing here works under Wesley in some capacity, or has worked alongside him, and asked to be here the moment they heard what his own family thought of him. We didn't come to make a scene. We came because a man who has quietly held up so many people deserved someone to hold him up today, especially when the people who were supposed to didn't show up. He looked directly at my father again, a forklift operator, you called him. I'd call him the backbone of a company with 4,000 employees. And frankly, I'd trust him with far more than I'd trust most men in suits. The chapel erupted into a hush of whispers, then scattered claps that grew louder. I watched my father's face drain of all its arrogance, replaced by something small and ashamed. Something he clearly hadn't expected to feel in front of 200 witnesses. My mother stared at her hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I turned back toward Wesley, who was openly crying now, shoulders shaking, watching the people he'd quietly helped for years stand up for him in the one moment he needed it most. Marcus stepped back and gestured toward me. Please continue. We just wanted him to know he wasn't walking into this family alone. I walked the rest of the aisle between 2 rows of strangers, who felt in that moment more like family than the people I'd grown up with. When I reached Wesley, he took my hands and whispered that he loved me, his voice breaking. I whispered back that I'd never been prouder to become his wife. The ceremony continued, charged with something electric that the whole room had witnessed and would never forget. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, the silence was so complete you could hear the candles flickering. I glanced at my father. He kept his eyes down and said nothing at all. We exchanged our vows. When Wesley slid the ring onto my finger, the entire chapel rose to its feet in applause, the 30 strangers in gray, clapping loudest of all. At the reception, my father approached me once stiffly and mumbled something that was almost an apology, something about not realizing, about being wrong. I told him I appreciated the words, but that actions mattered more, and that he had a long way to go before I'd trust that he meant them. Wesley, ever gracious, still shook his hand. Still thanked him for coming. Because that was who Wesley was, a man who built bridges, even for people who never deserved the effort. Later that night, dancing under string lights with his arms around me, I realized my father had spent years trying to convince me Wesley was worth nothing. When in truth, Wesley was worth more than my father would ever understand. Value was never about job titles or salaries. It was about showing up, about quietly building people up instead of tearing them down. About being the kind of person 30 strangers would drop everything to defend. My family called my husband a nobody and let me walk alone. In the end, it was Wesley's nobody that filled that aisle with somebody's, and it was his love that taught me exactly what true worth actually looks like. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. This is Second Seat Stories, and there's a new one every day.